Hello and welcome back for the sixth video and the final video of this chapter of our project where we're making an action RPG in GameMaker. This video is a little bit code heavy because we're going to explore setting up a game manager object as well as setting up level transitions. And so we have a lot of infrastructure to code to be able to get this to work. There's actually very little object manipulation. This is a little bit heavier on the code side. So we left off with painting our level with invisible walls. And so right now we have a functional level. But to make this a really large adventure that will be have plenty of places to explore, we need a way to transition to a new map. Whether it's walking off the edge of the road right here, or if it's entering a cave to load a new dungeon. So we need to kind of set up a way to do that. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this video designing the next map, but I will walk you through how I'll duplicate my existing map to kind of save a little bit of time and to line things up appropriately on the edges. So let's say I want to make my east map. And again, I still haven't come up with a name better than Room 1. So we're going to take the existing Room 1 and we're going to duplicate it. I'm going to give it the very uncreative title of Room 2. It really wouldn't be that hard for me to go back through and rename all these rooms once I have a better sense of what I want to call everything. If this is like map tile 00 and maybe this other one is map tile 01, maybe we want to index them like a two-dimensional array. That could be a good way to name rooms. Anyway, room 2 right now is identical to room 1, but I don't really want to delete all of these layers. I do want to probably clear out some of the stuff that's on them, and the fastest way to do that is just to click the layer so that we can see the instances list, and then just hold down Shift and select all of them, and then just push the delete key, and that will wipe out your instances really quick. So like all of these trees on this instance layer, everything, just click on the first one, hold down Shift, and then boom. So some of these other layers, I don't really want to spend a whole lot of time on. So like, for example, if I'm looking at the details layer, maybe I do want to do some quick cleaning of this. Just edited the ground layer. So I can just take some of this out real fast. And the only part that I'm really interested in is roughly where did the mountains end, which is right here, so that I could very easily just remember to continue them at about the same height, so that when the player transitions, it's not going to look super weird like the mountains are at a different height. So now I know that those mountains are at the correct height, and so I'm going to erase the rest of that. Ground 2 had this wonderful pit on it, and so I'm going to try to do my best to continue that pit by picking the correct tile. Actually, I think I was using the auto tile. No, that's for the lava. Where's the correct pit color? I mean, it doesn't really matter. There it is. So if I wanted that same pit here, getting it at about the same height, just so that I can kind of continue that. Maybe the pit just all of a sudden really quickly ends over here, just so I don't have to deal with it. And then we would erase that old pit. Level design is a pretty tricky thing. You get a lot of practice with it if you spend time DMing like Dungeons and Dragons type stuff, or at least like looking at how those maps are set up. It's a really fascinating thing, and there's a whole lot to be said about good level design. And oh, long time ago, I was probably a little bit better at it. So, back like Doom and Half-Life a little while ago. So that's good for that layer. For this layer, we're going to do kind of the same idea. We want the river and the road to have about the same starting point. So I'm just kind of lining it up, doing my best to make sure so that that looks pretty on. So I can right click to erase the auto tile that we had from before. And the river was 1 unit big and right there. And I can right click to erase the rest of this. And so I don't really need a super complex amount of things, because I'm just using this to demonstrate map transitions. We could spend time making a better map later. All right, so with all of the layers, I essentially have that as all of my details, and that's the ending of the previous map. So that looks good. We don't need to add anything to the instances layer right now. We don't need to add a player because we're going to be setting up the ability for a game manager object to spawn the player. So let's jump back to room 1 real quick, and let's begin setting up the pieces that we need to go about doing this. So I'm going to import a few more of these development shapes just because I'm going to use them for my zone transitions. So I can create a developer tool to see where the zones are going to exit from. So I'm going to right click, create a new sprite, and I'm going to give it the name SPR underscore teal box. So I'm going to use kind of a teal color. Well, actually, let's use green. I'm going to use green and yellow. Green's going to be the exit, green for go, like a traffic light. And then we'll use yellow for the spawn points. So green box, import green box. Now this one, I do want to center the origin because as far as our transitions are going to go, this is going to be very essential because we're going to detect where the player exits relative to this center. And then that will allow us to kind of have the player spawn, not always in the dead center, but kind of appropriate to where they left the map from. And just for good measure, in case we do use a diagonal, I am going to switch its collider to a precise type. Because if we rotate this, the collider wouldn't rotate unless it was on precise. And for the sake of speed, I'm going to duplicate this and create a one called yellow box. So SPR yellow box. Double click it to make sure I'm editing yellow box, and then imports the yellow box. And so we have our wonderful box of yellow. And I don't need to change anything because by duplicating it, it kept all the same settings. All right, so we're going to turn these into objects. So under objects, I'm going to create a new folder called managers. I can't think of a better term for it, but these are things that manage the game state. Invisible development tools, similar to what we did with the invisible walls, but designed to control things. So inside of this, we're going to create a new object called obj underscore exit underscore zone. And this is going to be a zone that if the player walks into it, it will trigger the new map. So this is going to get green. Green means go. And we probably don't want it to be visible, and we don't need anything else set on here. And actually, it's going to have no scripts. All that stuff is going to be handled by the player. Now, it will have some variables because we are going to have to edit these as instances in our maps. So we do want to pull up variable definitions, and I'm going to add a few. So I'm going to name this map underscore target because it has to do with the map, the map we're going to load to. And the data type, because it's targeting a map, the data type that makes sense for that is an asset. A map is an asset. We're going to add another one. Map underscore spawn tag. So this is going to be the name of the spawn point that it's going to look for in the new map. So this is going to be a string, so we can give it like a text name. And then the last one is going to be called map underscore exit underscore type. And this is going to be a list type. And that way it's going to give us a drop-down box of what to pick. So we're going to specify some types of exits that can occur. So we want to click this gear to edit the list. And we're going to add a few things here. First up, inside of quotes, because we want this to behave like a string, we'll do none. And that's for nothing fancy. Next one will be a point exit. A point exit will be kind of like a dungeon or door. The map that you load doesn't have any connection to the previous map. So like that little door, the cave entrance, it doesn't matter where I spawn on the new cave because it's not connected kind of geographically. The next type, keeping with our same pattern of naming, we're going to go left, right, up, down. So west, east. So this is if you go off the west edge of the map. This is if you go off the east edge of the map. This is if you go off the north edge of the map. And this last one is going to be if you go off the south edge of the map. And we're going to write some code to handle transitions based on how you left the level. If you walked off the screen to the right, aka walking off to the east, then we're going to align you only vertically on the spawn point. You'll see what I mean when we get to the code. All right, so those are the 6 options that we have here. And what will end up happening is the user, when the developer, will choose a type here for our exits. All right, so we can now close this. The next one that we want to play with is we need to create like a spawn point. So we're going to right click and create a new object. This will be called obj underscore spawn underscore point. This is going to be where the player spawns. And we could rename this the spawn zone if we want some kind of naming symmetry. Maybe I'll do that. So now it's called obj spawn zone, just so it's symmetric with the other name. It's not going to have any events. We're going to give it the yellow box. And not visible because we don't want to see these yellow boxes. Maybe during development we do. Now for its variables, it's going to need a, not a lot, honestly. So we're just going to start with map underscore tag. Is that what I named it in the other one? Spawn tag is what I called it. So let me try to be somewhat consistent. Ooh, my power just went out. Good thing I'm on a UPS power backup. So this is now called map underscore spawn tag. And it should be a string as well, because we are going to be typing text into that. taking out that 0 because I don't want it to be like 0 as the default. So that's the only thing we need here is a spawn tag so it knows where it's looking from. All right, so this looks good. We can close these. If we want, we can go into our level and place some of these so that we can start being able to test them. I'm going to focus mostly just on the ability to walk off the stage over here. I will include a second video that deals with entering the cave. And so dealing with all of that. So I'll have a short video like after this that focuses just on the cave and stuff. So to exit off this edge, I do want to make a new layer just because I like the convenience of being able to turn off an entire layer and to be able to lock a layer so I don't accidentally like move my clipping walls. So I'm going to create another layer. Right click it so I can rename it. And what would be the best name for this? Like exits. Exit underscore spawns. Exit and spawn. So it's just exit spawn. This is the layer for me to place all of my exit zones and my spawn zones. So I'm going to start by placing an exit zone right here, so that if I walk off the edge, we can trigger that. And I'm going to place a spawn zone right here. Now, after we see how we do this, we, in theory, could extend this out to the entire edge. But let's just play with it on the edge of the road for now. So when looking at this, we are going to have to change some of the variables for this specific instance. So when we click on, let's start with the spawn or the exit zone first, the green exit zone. If we open up variables, we can change these instance variables for this specific spawn zone. So this is where we can, click on override this variable, and then we can choose the target map. We can choose room 2. That way, when we bump into this, we have the data for which level to load. The spawn tag, we need a name for what we're seeking. We could call this, and I'm putting it in quotes because it's a string, from, we'll call it map. Well, we'll just call it room 1. From underscore room 1. Because it's a string, you can have spaces in it, but I guess I'm a little superstitious and I like to use my underscores. And the exit type, we're walking off the east edge, so we're going to choose east from the bottom here. And that's how we're going to set up an exit in order for us to be able to kind of rig these up. Now, over here, we only have one thing to change for a spawner. We would make this say from underscore room 2. And we'll put it in quotes. Shouldn't matter, but we'll put it in quotes anyway. So this is the exit to from room 1, and this says from room 2, because this is where we're going to spawn when we walk off of a room 2 map. So we'll do the same thing over here in room 2. We're going to need that same layer, which I call it exit underscore spawn. So we're going to add a new layer. Exit underscore spawn. And I'm going to place in those spawn points kind of in this same pattern. Walking off the map will take you to the exit zone, but then we're going to spawn you in the map. And I don't use the same thing to be able to do the spawning because I don't want to spawn the player inside of the thing that triggers them to exit the map. So you do have to be careful if your player sprite is bigger than 64 pixels, you may accidentally be spawning the player too close to the exit zone. So you might find that when the player walks off the edge, you either get stuck in an infinite loop where it like jiggles back and forth, or it just never transitions. In that case, you might need to move the spawn zone a little bit forward or move the exit a little bit back. Just kind of point, like we shouldn't run into that, but it can happen if your sizes are a little bit weird. All right, so same deal. This spawn zone, or this, the spawn zone has the tag of from room 1. Again, these are strings, so we need to make sure the capitalization matches. And I think I did it all lowercase. So yes, this is all lowercase. Oops. So from room 1, and now this one, the target map, we click on the thing, we want to go to room 1. The spawn tag is going to be from room 2. And the exit type is, in this time we're walking off the west edge of the map. And the reason we have the spawn tag is that way you can have multiple exits off of a map that may take you to the same map. Maybe you're sneaky and instead of taking the road to go to the enemy camp, you exited behind the bushes. So we want to spawn the player in a more sneaky spawn. So that's why we would use tags, is so that we could have multiple spawn points if we wanted to. Okay, so we've set the maps up to do what we need. Now we'll talk about that in another video. So now what we need to do is start setting up a game manager. And so the game manager is going to be the object that does everything. And it's going to be kind of our repository for data. We're going to try to avoid using global variables as much as we can and offload a lot of this to the game manager. And so that's what we should start with. So we're going to create a new object called obj underscore game underscore manager. And it's not going to have a sprite. We can uncheck visible if we wish. Now this is very important. We want it to be persistent. It is important for this to be persistent because it's going to follow us from map to map. When we walk off the edge of the map, we're not going to put a new game manager on the next map. This game manager is going to follow us to that other map, which is going to be what allows us to remember information between levels, such as player hit points, game state, what power-ups you might have, which switches or keys you've collected. So it's important that we pick persistent. Now, to make things a little bit easier, let's declare a few variables. This manager is going to be responsible for remembering the stuff when we exited the map. So I'm going to have a map underscore source. This will be of type asset. This is going to remember the map we just left from. Map underscore target. This is the map that we're going to. Map underscore load. This is going to be a Boolean that tells the manager that something requested a map load, be it a player or a cutscene or something. Something just told the manager, hey, check your map target and load it. Map underscore spawn tag. This is the string of where we want the player to spawn on the target map. I'm going to set it to start because that's going to how also I set my initial start spawn point. Then some numbers. This is going to be map exit offsets x. And it's type 0 and a real. And then this will be called map underscore exit underscore offset y. We're going to play with that, and that's so that to make a really bad MS Paint diagram, what those offsets are going to be used for is so here's my little green spawn point. If the player walks off the map right here, what we want to do is we want to, and we made the center of this object here. We want to record how many pixels this distance was. Maybe this was 120 pixels. So when we load the new map, so when we go to room 2 and we are coming in on the spawn point right here, we measure that many pixels to place the player again. So when the player comes into the new map, they're at that same position. Or if you walked off on the bottom, then you appear on the bottom of the next map. So that's going to be the purpose of these offsets. Is they will allow us to kind of get a nicer edge transition. But the thing is, we won't use that for point transitions. We'll see it in action once it's all coded. So these are the variables that right now the game manager is going to be responsible for. I've prefixed them all with map. So like things like hit points or keys or other things, those will have a different prefix when we start giving the player a little bit more data. So let's get to some shenanigans with this. So the biggest problem right now is I only want one copy of Game Manager. So what could happen, obviously I'm going to have to place a copy of Game Manager, and I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to just go to my first map, the first scene of the game, and place my Game Manager. Now the problem is, when the player walks off this map and comes back into this map, there's going to be another Game Manager waiting here that's a persistent object. And we don't want two game managers because then the player's not going to know which one to store data on. So we're going to have to come up with a way to make it so that the game manager only keeps one copy of itself. So let's see how to do that. Let's go to game start first because there's some global variables we have to set up. Oh, if you want to change that of like what's pops open when you open your code window, under preferences, object editor, you can edit this. So I'm tired of having all of that extra space. All right, so I'm going to have a global variable called manager, and that's going to be set equal to the built-in variable no one. So this is going to be an instance reference, an object reference to the manager, so that any object in the game can just say global.manager.whatever and get access to variables. For what it's worth, game start triggers before room start. So we're going to do room start next. That's under other, room start. So whenever you enter a new room, room start is going to trigger. So whenever we transition off of a map, this triggers. And this is where we're going to have to protect against multiple copies of the game manager. So first up is protect, or we'll just say keep one game manager. Also spawn player on map. Well, I think that's about it for now. There'll probably be more. So first up, we only want to keep the very first copy of the object game manager. So if global.manager equals no one. And so that's going to be true the very first time the very first room loads. What we're going to do is say global.manager equals ID. ID is the same thing as like this in Java and C++ or C#. So we're setting it to a reference to this object. It's an object reference at this point. Otherwise, if the first one happens, we're not going to check this. So if the first one isn't no one, and then global.manager is not equal to this ID. So for example, this is the second copy of Game Manager that spawned when we came back to room 1. So we don't want to keep a second copy of Game Manager. We want to delete the extra copies that weren't the original. So we'll just say instance _ destroy. And that will delete a duplicate game manager. So let's continue trying to go about spawning the player. So when we spawn the player on a new map, we need to get a list of all of the potential spawn zones. So we're going to start by getting the total number of possible spawns. This is, so I'm just going to call this num spawn points. Instance _ number obj spawn zone. So that'll give us a number of how many, and we're just going to use that to iterate through all of the possible copies out there. So iterate through all the possible spawn points. For var I, so this is a standard for loop, I is less than the number of spawn points, I++, pretty standard for loop. We're going to then make a reference. So we'll get the current spawn point as a variable. So var spawn point equals instance _ find obj _ spawn zone, comma, I. What you can think of this is like a giant array. So it's like the instance find essentially is it gets an array of all of these, but then only accesses this specific instance. So if you imagine all of the arrays of all of the spawn zones are sitting inside of an array, it's getting an array of all of that and accessing the ith element. So it's going to iterate through all the possible spawn zones. So this spawn point is going to be every spawn zone. Every spawn zone on this map is going to have a turn being spawn point. GameMaker's a little archaic in how it handles those data structures. I would have just preferred an array list, but you know. So then we want to check to see if the tag from our exit zone matches the spawn zone. So we're looking to see if we find a match on the tag. So if spawn point dots, now this is where we're using those instance variables, so we might want to check to see what we called that. So we want to check our spelling. map underscore spawn tag. I can just copy it. So if spawn point dot map underscore spawn tag is equal to map spawn tag, which is the thing that we're on. It's basically saying like this, but we don't have this in this language. So if the tags match, we want to spawn the player. So instance underscore create underscore layer. So first we specify the X and the Y. And we want to use the spawn points X and Y to do this. So we're going to say spawn point dot X plus map exit offset X, comma, spawn point dot Y plus exits offset Y, spawn on the instances layer, and spawn object player. And then exit the loop with a very lazy way of exiting the loop. We're just going to use a break command to get out of that. And then we're going to just reset the offsets for cleanliness, just so that we don't accidentally remember an offset that we don't want. And so this is going to be the code that ends up spawning the player. Now we have one more thing to do inside of the manager, and that is to set up the, I guess, the listener, for lack of a better term, of what's going to recognize when the player asks for a new map. So we're going to add an event on the begin step. And this is going to be listen for a new map load command. If map underscore load equals true, then map underscore load equals false, and then we're going to load our new map, room underscore go to map underscore target, because that's the instance variable that's going to store where we're going. And so the player is going to write that information into this object. And so the player is going to be what requests this map load. So we're done with this. We're done with the game manager. Now all we've got to do is set up the event inside the player that's going to trigger this loading of a new map. So we're going to jump over to player, and we're going to set this up as a collision with an exit zone. And this is going to be load a new map. So essentially, we're just going to access a lot of things on the manager. So the first thing we're going to do is global.manager. Remember that global variable has a reference to the manager. So then we can say global.manager.source. Oh, I'm sorry, it's called map source. Map underscore source. And set it to my current room. So we're going to store information about new map in the manager. Then global.manager map spawn tag, the spawn that I want, that information is held on the exit zone that I bumped into. So we'll say other dots map spawn tag, because that's the variable on the exit zone that exit that I just bumped into is going to be remembering. Global.manager.target. This is the map underscore target. This is the map we want to load. And again, the other object, the thing that I'm bumping into, is going to be remembering that. It remembers the target and the spawn tag. Now we'll calculate the offsets. So this is actually all you need for a core, like just load the next map. Well, and I guess load the map. Global.manager.map underscore load equals true. So those are really the only 4 lines that you need to trigger the map load. Now we're just going to deal with the offsets of where to be. So we're going to clear these out. So we're resetting X and Y to 0. If we walked off, if the exit type, so if other.map exit type is equal to west, or other.map exit type is equal to east. We could get more specific if we need to in future iterations of this code, but for now, if you walk off basically a horizontal edge, we only need to worry about the Y offset. So global.manager.map exit offset Y is going to be equal to the player's Y minus the exit zone's Y. And then we're just going to do essentially the same thing. So I'm going to copy this for the other types of exits. If we walk off the north or the south, we're going to only worry about the X positioning. So that'd be X minus other X. Now, I haven't play tested that, so hopefully I don't mess that up, because the Y's would be inverted because the Y is inverted. So let's see if this works. We can hit play. We have a player. We're going to walk. And then we're going to walk off the edge. And we appear over here. And the genius, oh, it took us back to there. But see, what's happening is I have multiple copies of the player. So if I keep on walking into this wall, you can see the other copy of the player that came from that got spawned by the manager. So now we've got 2 copies of the player. So what that tells me is I don't want the player on the map initially. So I need to actually take this player out and put a spawn zone for where I want the player to start the game at. So I'm going to give this variable, I'm going to call this start. Because then when the room loads, the manager is going to look for the start tag to spawn a player. And so this is the starting point of the player's adventure. That way we don't have 2 copies of the player in the map, so when I come back to this map, there's already a player there and I get 2 copies of the player, which would not what I want. All right, so notice that I came in here. I spawned in on that spawn point. And when we walk off the edge, everything works out pretty well. We're able to appear at an appropriate space. So it might be worth for us to be able to extend. It seems that we can get away extending this all the way up. So we could do that. We could just, because there's nothing that the player is going to appear and get stuck on over here. So we would be in the clear to do that. Now we'll have to address this because like I don't have a spawn for down there. Like maybe the player can backtrack and end up over here. I don't think I lined that up right, but oh well. So when we go off the edge, we're over here, but we could also return back up here. And we've got our edge transition. Now, we have a really strong foundation for being able to load new maps. All you really have to do as you begin to develop new levels is have an exit zone. So like if I wanted to start making a third level off of here, place an exit zone. Make sure that I set the variables. So like it needs a map target. Well, I don't have a room 3, so I can't set that yet. But maybe I'll call the spawn tag from room 1. It's okay if that's duplicated because it's loading map 3, not map 2. So it's okay if this has the same name as this one's exit because it's going to be going into a different map. And then this would have exiting to the south. And then I bring in a spawn point. And the spawn point would just have the tag from room 3. And that's how it would know to bring me back to that spawn point. So it's a very flexible system that is going to allow us to set up all kinds of map transitions. And so if you join me for the next video, I'm going to take a look at setting this cave up so it looks good. It should be a really short video where I fix the issue of the overhang. Because if you notice, if the player walks under it, it looks kind of bad. And so we'll set that up. But right now we have a really successful map transition. And so we'll call it quits here. And aside from that other video where I build the cave, this is essentially the end of the first chapter. In the next chapter, we're going to start exploring giving the player attacks and then also kind of setting up a little bit more of a UI so that we can kind of see some health, see some data that persists. So thank you for watching. I hope you learned something new. This is actually one of my favorite things to kind of design and think about is these exit transitions. It's a really cool topic. So enjoyed designing cool maps.